Just as the ancient Near Eastern conception of prophecy and prophethood may mean different things in different contexts, so Orpheus may be all things to all men. Orpheus appears in countless legendary stories as the son of the solar Apollo, the high priest of Dionysus, and the muse Calliope, or as a devoted worshipper of Apollo himself. Accordingly, Orpheus makes Helios the same as Apollo and Dionysus, though as a giver of oracles and a prophet, he always was a companion of Apollo, and he was always devoted to Bacchus. Subsequently, Dionysus sent the Maenads against him in jealousy, and he was torn to pieces like the Egyptian Osiris. And so Orpheus is a prophet in the trivial sense of a person who foretells the future, or in the sense of the theological administrator, an authority in covenants and treaties of the Israelite politico-military enterprises. In both cases, prophecy is an integral part of the divination, whose fundamental cosmological premise and logic are based on the ancient ideology of Near Eastern royalty. Consequently, prophecy is a form of divination, along with dreams, visions. By the time we get to the 1st century, Orphism and Judaism are starting to marry each other. There are Orphic texts that are used by the Jews, and the Jews in Alexandria are even claiming Orpheus as one of their prophets. Plato writes about Orpheus and Musaeus, Orpheus being the teacher of a man named Musaeus. There are some who later think that this is Moses, but the Alexandrians flip this on their head and say that it's the other way around, that Musaeus, or Moses, is the teacher of Orpheus. And so the pagans and Jews go back and forth on who is more important to them between Orpheus. Some of the Orphic plates, golden plates about how to get through Hades and be transmigrated, are adopted by Gnostic Christians in the 2nd century. The term Orphism is somewhat ambiguous, as it is not clear exactly what it refers to. The ancients never spoke of Orphism, but only about Orpheus. Think of Orpheus like a prophet. Orpheus is presumed to be the author of Orphic books and certain Orphic rites. A book became Orphic simply by being ascribed to Orpheus. The question of whether Orphism existed as a religious movement or as merely a set of beliefs described in the Orphic literature remains controversial. The rise of Orphic ideas and the nature of Orphic practices remain obscure despite some recent discoveries. The unifying factor, Orpheus, is a mythical figure of Thracian origin, whose main characteristic was unique gift for music. This characteristic features in a number of ancient stories about Orpheus. He is said to have enchanted Hades with his song, so that his prematurely dead wife Eurydice returned to life. To have taken part in the Argonauts' expedition and ousting the Sirens, and to have been beheaded by Thracian women, while his head continued to sing hymns. Though his achievements, Orpheus appears as a great shaman, somebody whose spirit can affect the whole of nature, from plants and animals to souls and even gods or Hades. These achievements are often the subject of the Orphic poems, usually hymns or longer poems of theogonic or cosmogonic content, most of them now lost or only partially preserved. Such Orphic poems presumably started to circulate from the 6th century BCE to the 5th and 4th centuries. As the testimony of various authorities suggest, Plato and others. A relatively recent find, the Derveni Papyrus, which I've done a video about recently, discovered in a tomb in northern Greece and dating from the 4th century BCE, contains a commentary on an Orphic theogony and proves to such Orphic poems were in circulation already in the 5th century BCE. In the 6th century CE, Damascus, discussing the Orphic account of beginnings of the world, talks of 3 Orphic theogonies, of which he had only indirect knowledge. According to the core of Orphic cosmogony, Kronos, the primordial divinity, gives birth to Aether and Chaos, and they generate a world egg. The link between these poems and a cult of Orpheus is difficult to determine. The Derveni papyrus, buried and burned with an unknown Greek, makes even clearer the close linking of religious practices to a specific text. Orphism seems to have been very much a book of religion. Plato talks purveyors of purifications and rituals which bring deliverance from unrighteousness, claiming that these people perform rites in accordance with books by Musaeus and Orpheus. The most ancient testimony to Orphic practice comes from Herodotus, with reference to the prejudice against introducing woolen articles into temples or being buried in them. Herodotus says this is an Egyptian custom, and in this they agree with the practices which are called Orphic and Bacchic, though they are actually Egyptian and Pythagorean. Herodotus is not only one who identifies Orphic with Bacchic rites. In Euripides' Hippolytus, Theseus uses the verb Bacchuian for Orphic rites. Archaeological evidence further supports the close relation between Orphic and Bacchic rites, and Orpheus often figures in artistic depictions of predominantly Dionysiac themes. Orpheus is sometimes said to be the initiator of the cult of Dionysus, but at other times he is presented as having neglected the worship of Dionysus after his journey to Hades, instead venerating the sun, for which his punishment was his assassination by a group of Thracian women. We hear of active Orphicoi in Athens and in southern Italy in the 5th century BCE, and we know of their distinctive views. But little is certain of their rites. Ancient sources speak of Orphic rites, though without giving precise information, and also participants in these rites. Presumably, the mysteries referred to, at least in some of those occurrences, are the Eleusinian mysteries. In some sources, Orpheus is mentioned as their founder. And Orphic mysteries are sometimes identified with the Eleusinian mysteries, according to Pausanias. Orphic ideas indeed permeated the Eleusinian and also the Theban mysteries of the Cabiri. Orphics were particularly concerned with the purity of the soul, which was deemed to be imprisoned in the body. This purity was sought through an ascetic way of life, with strict rules, especially about diet, such as abstinence from meat, but also from eggs, beans, and wine. Orphics believed in an afterlife and the transmigration of the soul, similar to reincarnation, a feature which brings Orphism closer to the Pythagorean ideas rather than Eleusinian mysteries. There is a certain common ground between Orphism and Pythagoreanism, and perhaps some rivalry between them. To judge from such contradicting testimonies as that according to which Pythagoras and the Pythagoreans were the true authors of Orphic poems, and that Pythagoras was indebted to Orpheus. Orphic literature proliferated in the Hellenistic and imperial eras. In the religious syncretism of late antiquity, the name Orpheus continued to fascinate. But now there was even less concern for demarcation between Orphic and other religious cults. A significant revival of interest in Orphic literature occurs with the Neo-Platonists. Orpheus was now not only an inspired poet, but also a theologian and a prophet. The Orphic poems were interpreted allegorically. Under this interpretation, were held to be in accord with the doctrines of Platonic philosophy. The Orpheus legend had a considerable impact on Christianity. Although the Orphic rites were dismissed, the story of Orpheus' charming nature with his music was interpreted as a prefiguration of Christ by Clement of Alexandria, charming human souls with his teaching. Christ in his role, the Good Shepherd, is said to be the new Orpheus. And Christ is the new Orpheus, singing the song of salvation. The figure of Orpheus, which is often found in catacombs, stands for Christ, who can be depicted as Orpheus himself. As you see here in the ancient catacombs, Orpheus is depicted right next to Jesus. And with that being said, I want to know what you guys think about that. Orpheus is the Orphic mysteries sort of what fills the void before Christianity, if that makes sense? Or is Christianity, in a real sense, what fills the void after Orphism? Or do they blend into each other through an evolution of ideas? What do you guys think about Orphism? Let me know in the comments, and you have just attained true Gnosis.